Hello and welcome to our daily devotions. You know, analytics tell us that some of you will only stay with us for another 90 seconds. So before some of you leave, I want to just take a minute to say something very important today, and it is this. The Methodist Church in Great Britain believes that Black lives matter. Now, if you're still with us, our reading for today, it's taken from Isaiah chapter 6 and reading verses 1 to 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongues. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here am I. Send me. You know, I've always loved this passage from Isaiah 6, and I do so for a couple of reasons, really. The first one is that it gives an account of the call of the prophet Isaiah. So it resonates with me as somebody who believes himself to have been called by God too, and also to a prophetic ministry of sorts, as I've been called to be a preacher of the gospel. So I chime with the passage for that reason, that it's to do with call, and I chime with Isaiah's response to it, who basically what he's called, his first response is to say, I'm just not worthy. Heaven forbid that anybody who feels a call of God upon their lives would ever think that they were worthy or equal to the task. And then there's another thing about it which I value, and it's the fact that he more or less has the manifesto for his ministry when he cries, Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live amongst a people of unclean lips. In other words, even before he sets out on his ministry, he is determining never to speak down to his people, because he, like them, is a man of unclean lips. If you like it, another way of putting it, is in the same boat as they are. Yeah, it's not for him to talk down to them. It's for them to walk alongside, for him to walk alongside them, as somebody who shares their common humanity. I've always taken this as my cue for my sermons. I hope I'd never preach down to anybody. I always say I'd never preach a sermon unless I preach it first to myself. And I really do believe that I'm not there to preach down, but to walk together along the way that Jesus has set before us. Talking about walking together reminds me of quite a moving piece of film I saw from CNN News this week on the internet of Sheriff Swanson in Flint, Michigan, who was confronted by a crowd of protesters on the Black Lives Matter campaign, all of which, of course, is a response to the horrific killing of George Floyd. In many cities where these protests have taken place, from the police's point of view, there's been militarized armour, protective gear, tear gas, batons. And on the part of the protesters, sometimes it in itself has overspilt into looting and violence, vandalism. In Flint in Michigan, Sheriff Swanson stood before the crowd of protesters. He quite deliberately laid his baton down before them. He took off his protective gear and he said to the crowd, I want this to be a parade and not a protest. And then the crowd started to shout to him, walk with us, walk with us. So that's what Sheriff Swanson did. And he spent time talking to people in the crowd, spent time giving high fives, having selfies taken on people's mobiles. Then he walked with him through the city. And they walked together. I think Sheriff Swanson realised that it's also too easy, especially in our world today, to become so polarised, to look at other people who are different to us and to think they're wrong and I'm right. And because of their difference, I'm immediately going to jump to the point of conflict, rather than seeking to understand, rather than walking together. Often when people walk, of course, they get to talk. And as they get to talk, ignorance is diminished, suspicions are allayed, and friendships and understanding is formed. He took a bit of a gamble, actually, Sheriff Swanson, because I know from other things that I've read that people have appealed to the better nature of a crowd, thinking that that's the same as appealing to the better nature of a person, but it's not. Crowds act differently to the way that individual people play their part and they react. It was a bit of a gamble. This crowd could have easily turned against him. He did, after all, represent the same police force, a member of which had knelt on the neck of George Floyd until he was dead. So it was a gamble. It was a great cost to himself. Could have cost him actually his life. Similar kind of gamble actually that Pontius Pilate took when he stood before a crowd appealing to their better nature and said, who do you want me to release to you? To be Barabbas, or do you want it to be Jesus? And of course, because crowds can be infiltrated and easily manipulated, they shouted for the crucifixion of Jesus and for the setting free of Barabbas. And in order to walk alongside us, it cost Jesus his life. And in costing him his life, it reminded us that if we really believe that Black Lives Matter, and if we really want to walk together with those who really want to make a difference, so that we don't just say Black Lives Matter, but things change in such a way so that Black lives know that Black Lives Matter. It may be very costly to some of us, but without that cost, without that willingness to sacrifice, without the willingness, for example, of people such as Sheriff Swanson to take risks and become very vulnerable and to walk together, still nothing will ever change for all the words that will have been spoken. If you look on the Methodist website today, you'll see that one of the questions that Jill Baker asks in response to this passage is something like this. She said, in the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah had a very particular experience of God. In future years, she says, when you look back and you think of the year of the coronavirus, what experience of God will you be able to point to? We know there's been many negatives during the year of this pandemic, but there have been some positives that have come out of it too. Our daily devotions we regard as one of them. But wouldn't it be lovely if we're able to say that one of the best things that came out of the year of the coronavirus was that we came to realise not only in word, but also in deed. And indeed, in a way that actually made things change, not only for better, but also for good. If we could say, in the year of the coronavirus, we all came to understand in a way that we'd never understood before that Black lives matter.